Well, I've done a couple of previous sewing machine videos, starting with my mid-60s Kenmore, which was kind of an average family machine at the time. And then I showed my Singer Spartan, which was a very basic entry-level machine, an old cast iron design. And now I've gone to the other end of the spectrum completely, because this was something really special. And this traces its roots to a young Spanish engineer in the 1930s who repaired sewing machines. I don't know if that was his hobby or his job. But he came up with a whole bunch of ideas for how sewing machines work and how they could be improved. And when the Spanish Civil War broke out, he left for Switzerland. And he formed a company with some investors, which they called Electrina. And they were going to manufacture sewing machines. But sewing machine manufacturing is a complicated business. It requires a lot of casting, machining. So they partnered with a Spanish armaments firm. This was a company that made timing devices for bombs and mortars and such. So they had a lot of precision equipment for the manufacture of sewing machines, which they started in, I think, about 1940. But that was not a good time to be exporting sewing machines from Switzerland in the middle of World War II. But this came out after the war. This actually dates to 1952, and this was an amazing machine at the time. And this is, well, got this very fancy metal case, which you didn't see. But this is not just a case. This actually folds out into a table. So let's pop this thing open and take a look at it. And this is quite a piece of work. And the company Elna, well, Elna is a shortened version of Electrina, so that's where the name came from. And they first produced a machine called the Grasshopper. But this came out a little bit later, and this was quite amazing. So let's just take a closer look at this. Now I'm going to remove this from its carrying case. And as I mentioned, this carrying case actually folds into a table. Now if you were a housewife in 1952 and you walked into a sewing center and you saw this thing, you would think you had walked into a science fiction movie. There was absolutely nothing like this at the time. I mean, this was just generations ahead of everything, in almost every way. One thing I'll point out right first off, because you can see me moving it right now, is this had a knee bar control. And that hangs over the edge of a table. I won't do it now because I'll have to pull this off the table, but this didn't have a foot pedal. This had a knee bar control. And as I said, you would control the speed just by pressing on it with your knee. And as you'll note, you don't see an external motor on this machine, which was rather uncommon at the time. Not unheard of, but uncommon. That's because the motor is inside, facing up in the pylon. But there are features in this machine that were like quite literally two full generations of anything else. I mean, above anything else. This was just pure science fiction at the time. Now, for one thing, this was a zigzag machine. Well, not just zigzag. It could do multiple decorative stitches. Again, at the time, that was virtually unheard of in a home machine. Singer had done a little work with it, and an Italian company called Necchi had introduced one. But in 1952, you really didn't think of buying a zigzag machine for home use. That was just not really on the table because they were extremely rare and very problematic. This not only zigzag, it did decorative stitches, and I'll zoom in and show you where the cams went for that. But perhaps the most amazing thing was this free arm. And again, free arms today are common. But actually, and it seems hard to believe now, they really didn't become dominant really until the early 1980s. Like even in the 1970s, free arms were sort of an expensive option. And Singer in the United States never actually produced free arm machines. They did make some free arm machines overseas, like the 221 featherweight in the UK and the 431G in Germany. But even their modern Anderson factory in Anderson, South Carolina, it was simply not set up for free arms. And of course the free arm is what allows you to put like a pant leg or something over there if you're hemming it. Free arms in home machines were simply unheard of in 1952. So this thing had just, you know, an unbelievable number of features in it. It was cast aluminum, so it was moderately light. And again, because the motor was inside, there was no belts to adjust. It used a wheel which pressed up against another wheel. So when the motor spun, the wheel would push on the pressure plate, which turned the whole machine. So let's zoom in here for a call. Now this is basically the control center of the machine. In here, this little lid lifts up, and you could install plastic cams which would allow you to do multiple decorative stitching. I do not have a lot of cams. I've got the cam that's in the machine. They made dozens of them, and they're a little expensive to find these days. But you would unscrew a little nut here, and you could put in a cam which would control, you know, the type of stitch that you got. This controlled the length of the stitch, and these are stops, so that if you went down here, you had reverse, and you could adjust where this was so that you could have different lengths going forward and a completely different length going backwards. So that controlled the stitch length. This device controlled the width of the zigzag if you were using a zigzag or a blind hem wheel or whatever, and this controlled the position of the needle in the machine. So this was essentially the heart of the device, and I'll just point out up here, this is the bobbin winder, and that was the automatic stop. So you'd put a bobbin on there, wind it, and as it got full, it would just click into the off position. And something you don't see on this machine is the external tension mechanism. And on modern machines, the tensioning device was buried in the machine. They started doing that a few years ago. But you know, right through the 80s and I think into the 90s, you got a separate control that came out that you wrap the thread through to control the tension. You don't see that here. It's not on the sides, not on the front. Like modern machines, it has basically an internal system where you pull the thread around the back, and it comes through the tensioning discs here. Also on top, this sets the pressure for the presser foot. Now again, on many modern, well, virtually all machines, it was usually a little device that you press down, a little spring-loaded device. This has got a dial on it with numbers so that you can specifically set the pressure for the presser foot. This is a good shot of the free arm section and the drop-in bobbin. And Elna's used their own bobbins. You had to have an Elna bobbin for this machine, which is a bit of an inconvenience, but they're not that difficult to find. You can still buy them on Amazon. One of the advanced features of this machine, and a lot of singers had this in the old days, it's virtually unheard of on modern machines. This had a rotary hook. Now on most machines, you have what's called an oscillating hook, or an oscillating shuttle, which goes back and forth when it makes the stitch. Just back and forth, back and forth. On the rotary machines, the hook, which would catch the thread from the needle, just spins continuously. It doesn't go back and forth, it spins continuously. Now what that means is that at high speed, and these machines were capable of high speed, this is again a virtually vibration-free machine, because it's sort of like the difference between a jet engine and a piston engine. A piston engine, things are reciprocating, they're going back and forth, back and forth. This just spins continuously. So this made for a very, very smooth operation. Now because of the space constraints where I'm photographing this, I can't really show you the whole table or the whole case folded out into a table. But this just gives you an idea of how it was used. If you didn't want to use the free arm, you know, if you weren't hemming pants or something, and you wanted a flat surface, the table or the case would fold into a table which would slide onto the machine like that. So it actually, not only was the machine itself portable, but it essentially came with its own sewing table. Again, quite an interesting and efficient design. So there we have one of the most radical machines ever made. Again, in 1952, this was out of a science fiction movie. And even by current standards, this is an extremely modern, well-featured machine. Very high quality, made in Switzerland, so you would expect it to be high quality. I don't know what these things cost when they were new. It must have been an enormous amount of money. I would imagine you could have bought a good used car probably for what one of these cost, and very, very few people would have owned them. I don't talk a whole lot in the videos about what I paid for the machines. I kind of mention that a lot on my Facebook page. I make a big deal about it. But I'd been looking for one of these for a while. Walked into a thrift store one day, found this, and paid the princely sum of 16 Canadian dollars for it, which I guess is about, what, 12 or 13 American dollars? So I'm pretty happy with that deal. If you're a sewing machine collector, this is something you want to own. So there we have it, the 1952 Elna Supermatic. I think this particular model was made with some changes until 1958 or so, and then they continued to make it, but it had the changes got more significant, and I think there was a little drop in quality. But this is a very early one. So there we go, one of the most interesting machines ever made.